Tanya and I were just debriefing about a movie that I watched yesterday, and it was really drawing up a lot of emotion for me. And so we thought we should just hit record and talk about some of this stuff because I think that if it's true for me, it might be true for you. It might be true for somebody you know. And and that's shame. Shame, that that mad vicious cycle of guilt and shame. And
Murky water, that shame.
it is.
Water.
And I just a warning that this is a trigger warning for some folks. The content that we share today may very well stir something up inside you, and know that the purpose of us sharing our stories and our reflections on this is because it needs to be talked about. Because I don't want to hide it anymore. I don't want to pretend this shit never happened to me. I don't want to I want to move through this. I want to transcend this experience for me. And I'm hoping that by doing that for myself, it inspires you or somebody you know to do the same. Yeah.
It is a
So,
big subject, and we'll probably touch on it many more times throughout our, podcast history.
absolutely.
And today, just in particular, it was sort of conditioned for you to come up and surface through a movie that you watched, which quite often can replicate at least
Mm,
portions of our experiences in real life, right? So, as much as it is just a movie and it's on the big screen and there are actors, it portrays things that happen in real life. And so
yeah,
that is why we identify with those things. And I think it's why it's such important content to talk about, because shame is such a spectrum, and it is vast and large and very deep and has so
yeah.
many different meanings to so many different people. But I think that everybody can probably identify a place in their lives where they've felt shame around something.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's generational.
Same.
My mom's mom learned how to shove that stuff down really good. And I didn't really learn this about her until after her passing. I know my mom lived a life of shame and guilt. She was in that constant cycle. And I guess that's probably where I got a lot of that from, was just we don't share how we really feel about these really tough conversations. We don't talk about those kinds of things because
It's shameful.
nobody knows what to do about it. Nobody knows what to do with it. What will people think if they knew this truth about us? Right? There's this constant dialogue that happens. And quite frankly, I think I've always been a pretty open book. I feel like I'm pretty transparent. I don't have a problem sharing some of my deep stuff and dark stuff because I don't, there's no use, there's no sense in me holding on to this. There's a reason. In my mind, I've always believed that there's a reason that these situations have come up for me in my life. And it's not for me to keep my mouth shut. It's for me to exercise my voice and to share my experiences so that other women know they're not alone. I remember in 1997, my very first pursuit of excellence. I remember the first time in my life. It was I was 25 years old. And for the first time in my life, I remember feeling like, oh my God, somebody else has an alcoholic parent. I, I, I was experiencing some connection through this person's tragedy. And there was so much shame in that. But to be able to stand up and go, holy crap, I'm not alone. So I know the value that I had in somebody else sharing their story. Um, and this was around sexual abuse for me. This movie that I watched yesterday was an incredible movie. I don't know if we should plug the movie. We can plug the movie. It's called The Luckiest Girl Alive. Interesting. With Mila Kunis. And I was drug raped when I was 16. And I put myself in a position, well, backing up. So I don't know, for anybody who grew up in the North Delta, Surrey, maybe White Rock area, you might have remembered this underage nightclub, like dance club in Surrey. What was it called? Like,
Oh, I don't remember.
oh, I can't remember
Can't
what it was.
remember either, but there's a
It
dog
was in
somewhere.
Guildford.
Yeah,
It, it
is.
was,
Well,
it
the building's
was
still there, but yeah. Connections.
something like, anyways, whatever it was, I remember going there underage, totally sober. It was like a no alcohol, no drug. I wasn't like, Tanya and I, three of us would get drunk on like two tall cans of beer. This was our idea of a good time. We were pretty square. And so I was at this nightclub, and this really really hot guy, and I was a total nerd. Like I mean, I was an absolute nerd, the nerd of all nerds. I was not dressed. I never dressed provocatively. I always wore big baggy things to hide myself. I had a lot of body shame, and so when this really hot guy gave me attention, I was like, oh yeah. And he was clearly under
It
the
must
influence.
mean something, right? Did you make a
Yeah,
meaning out of that?
of course I did. Of course I did. Yeah. I was like, okay, so actually I might be good looking, or I might be attractive, or I'm not broken, or all of these stories that I told myself.
Yes.
And so this gentleman and I stayed connected, and he invited me up to a party they were having in Whistler. And so I thought, holy cow, like that would be really cool. Like Whistler, I get to go. Like I was 16. So my friend and I convinced our parents that we are going to Whistler. I don't think we quite told them the whole story.
I think you did
I'm
that.
pretty sure we didn't. We took the Greyhound bus up, and we got off at the village. And this guy came and met me in the village. And I was wearing like these baggy khaki pants and this really ugly, I remember how gross it was. It was this really big ribbed green sweatshirt that was like so baggy. I had short hair. I had like the little, like the muffin top hair with all the curls and shaved on the sides and in the back. I wasn't even wearing makeup. Like I mean, I was not looking for anything. But I did put myself in this position. And the day went on, and this fellow, hair on my tongue, not related, um, he continued to offer me drugs. He continued to offer me drinks, and I continued to say no. I just kept saying no. I just kept saying no. And then at one point, I remember having a glass of water, and I then fell asleep. He carried me into a bedroom, and without getting explicit in that, there's kind of one last memory, which was definitely he was going to do what he wanted to do to me as I was passed out, as I was drugged. I don't know how long I was out for, and I remember when I woke up from that, he's like, "Come on, get up, get out of here," kind of thing, like just totally a different person. And I remember just feeling super, just really out of it. Like I'd never experienced this feeling before, and I was really sore. And I went to the washroom, and I was like, "Oh my God, like did I have sex with him?" Like I actually phrased it to myself, like, did I do this with him? Well, I was like knocked out. I was unconscious. How could I do this with him?
Right.
And I remember looking in the mirror with just such disgust that I had put myself in this position, that somehow I did this. I did this. The friend that I was with, in fact, when I got out of the bathroom and I went to find her again, she got mad at me. She's like, "Where the fuck have you been?" And I didn't even tell her. It was
That's shame.
three years before I told anybody about what happened. And I lived with this pain of, I did this. I I remember, well, I wasn't wearing, that's why I point out the clothes, is because, a lot of guys were like, "Oh, well, you're kind of asking for it." There's these attitudes, and I just want to defunk all that shit, really. You know what? The only thing I did wrong was actually go there. But even going there and making a wrong choice to go to someone's house does not give somebody permission
You're right.
to do these things.
And unfortunately, it happens more often than anyone cares to speak about.
Yeah.
In telling that story reminds me of, I mean, my history is sexual abuse from very little as a child and all the way through, but this particular incident was also drug induced. It was in my mom's house. My mom and sister were in New York, and I was babysitting the house. And that feeling of out of control, like I'm in and out of consciousness. I don't really know what's going on, but I have a weak sense every time I wake up. I'm violently ill, like I'm really really sick, and I can't figure out why. I have had something to drink, but I've had something to drink like that many times, and it's not the same feeling. So I cannot shake it, because every time that I come to, there's something else happening, and there were two men involved in that circumstance, and it was very degrading because it was, albeit and up as rape, effectively. There was also some degradation in things they were making me do or things that they were doing to me without my knowledge, without my consent, and in and out of consciousness. So feeling foolish, when I woke up, and then to top it all off, they stole my mom's car. Police were called. They ended up, showing up at 3 or 4 in the morning, pounding on the door, and me getting there just sort of out of it, just like I have no idea what happened. Of course, I did not give them the keys, so they would have gone through my mom's private, stuff as well. And I don't think anything else went missing. That's not the point, right? I invited them in. They were friends of mine as I saw them at the time. What I learned was, yeah, they weren't friends at all. And the shame that I felt too, like I left in a cab that night because I was just did not want my dad to see me like that. And the place that I went to, sadly, was not a safe space either. And so the expectation was that if I was going to stay there, that I had to put out. And so on top of everything else, all of a sudden I was had this expectation of this older man that wanted something from me, and I didn't have any self-worth, like zero. And so I remember distinctly lying there and just thinking, please let this be over, please let this be over, please let this. And how many times people are in that situation where they don't have any control or they don't have a voice, they're frozen,
Mhm.
and how then afterwards the shame that I still carry today, 30 years later, right? Easily. And when I revisit those things, obviously the emotion that comes up that is unhealed parts of me that I've been carrying around, they're heavy and it's hard. And I think shame is one of those things, like you said, it festers, right? It
Yeah.
festers and it grows in the dark, and so it's a fungus. And as long as it continues to have shadow, and we keep it in the shadows, and we keep it out of being able to have conversations about it, because people are like, oh, well, we can't talk about that, that's too shameful. We can't talk
Yeah.
about that, it's too private. We can't
It's
talk about that, it's
embarrassing.
hard.
It's whatever.
Hard
Yeah.
stuff, right? But how vital it is to have the conversations and say, it was not okay,
Yeah. It's
and
never been okay.
never been okay, and that I didn't deserve to be treated like
No.
that at all, and
No.
that none of that, quote unquote, is my fault. And I think that quite often guilt and shame, the spiral that I've been in, is about what did I do wrong? What could
Yep.
have I done better, different, whatever. And granted, like you said, I made the decision to go there.
Yes.
And
That's
we
it.
talked about that before, about, like a level of accountability or responsibility of somehow intuitively knowing that you were putting yourself in danger, even though we didn't foresee what was going to happen. There was some sort of sense about it, right?
Yeah,
And
for me, there was some romantic idea that I had about this really hot guy giving me the time of day. And I was, at that time, I think that I knew that I could be in trouble, but it was more important for me to explore the idea of this guy actually fulfilling some made up fantasy I had.
and going back to, just because I make a decision to dress provocatively, to
Yeah,
go out and have a night out and stuff like that,
yeah,
does not give
no,
anyone the right to overstep that boundary. Yet it happens
never.
all the time, and it gets placating in this idea of, well, she was asking for it, or it was
Yes,
happening because of, or whatever. And even, I mean, learning, obviously, because these were not things that we talked about in our childhood, for sure. I would say it's more prevalent and talked about in my kids, age bracket,
generations, yeah.
generation, but still not enough, right? Still not enough. And that rape occurs in marriages, and
And it occurs in um different kinds of couples as well. I know that we have a mutual friend who left a party to go and explore a date with this fellow that he was really interested in. And I remember following up with him at a later time and I said, "So, how was it?" I was pretty excited to hear his response. And he's like, "It wasn't good. He really hurt me."
ugh, man, and the heaviness that I mean, and the fact that it always surprises me because we work alongside, go to school alongside,
Yeah,
see people on the bus. All of us have some sort of story
we
that
do.
may be someone else's related tragedy, and yet we carry that stuff really tight to the body, usually sometimes forgotten. When I think about trigger memories from abuse as a child, or when I experienced that with my kids. And the one thing that I knew when my kids disclosed their abuse was that I needed to bring it out of the shadows. I knew that I needed to do that, and I have no idea why. But I just knew that if we could talk about it and bring it out of the shadows and not make it that family dirty little secret that it had been, has been for generations in my family as well. So it's not new. But
Yeah.
I'm like, how can I make this different? How can I make this response different for my kids than my parents did for me? Because I feel like it too was one of those, oh, well, we can't possibly talk about that. It's too shameful. There's too much shame involved in that. So we're just going to pretend that it didn't happen. Well, unfortunately, the shame actually doesn't dissipate, right? It
No.
stays there, and it then becomes this burden that we all carry, and it can also be that dynamic in relationship, right? Like if all of a sudden that person, something, I know something, we both know something, and we're not going to talk about it, it still is present.
And we, how often, I know for myself, have rejected those pieces of me. Nope. I'm in denial of the fact that that is part of me. And in that very act of rejection of these parts of me, I am actually creating more tension and more pain and more shame and more guilt for me. Instead of, like you say, bringing it to the light, transcending the feelings that are associated with that, so that I can be free, so that I can love myself and forgive myself. Whatever these little stories that I'd made up is just to embrace all sides of me, all pieces of me, even the parts that really hurt, even the parts that are less than desirable.
Well, and we all have them. And so,
Yeah.
like to walk in this. And I honestly used to think, well, if I could just cut those things out, then I would be this whole loving, caring individual. And what I have come to learn in the last 2 years is that compassion for those parts of me that would be deemed as wrong or bad or dark or suspect, whatever the title is, that those are a part of me, and
Yeah.
those things actually need to be compassionately met and
Yeah.
honored and loved and appreciated, not denied and scrutinized and shamed and hidden, right?
Yeah.
And it's when I can accept all of those things that create this whole person.
Yeah.
And
And we're always whole. We're whole now. And
sure,
this is there's this lie, and I don't know where it started, but I don't think that I understood that I was a whole person until this last year.
for sure.
And I'm 50.
Same.
Right? Like it took me until age 50 to realize that I am whole, complete, and perfect. I used to think, and I used to actually tell the story that, you know, even back into the 90s, where I'd say, well, we had this wand. It was a 0 point gravity wand, and I would do these demonstrations for people with lemon and with wine. And Tanya was in on this too. It was actually Tanya's mom that introduced us to it. Um, and I would tell this story about we come into this world whole, complete, perfect, and then something changes. And then I would go on with my demonstration and I would say, okay, well, here's a lemon. So this lemon that I'm holding here, and we use these things that people can taste so that you can see that there's a difference in the before and the after of the wanding that would take place, this application of the 0 point gravity. And so with the lemon, it was brilliant because I could literally slice it, put it on two different plates, wand one. But I would tell people that this lemon, it was plucked from the tree when it was green. It wasn't ripe. It was force picked. It's been stored, it's been trucked, it's been stored, it's been trucked, it's been stored, it's been trucked, it's been like force ripened, whatever you want to call it. Now, like the quality of this lemon that we buy in the store is nothing like what it's intended to be.
Mhm.
But the truth is that it's always been whole. So then applying the 0 point gravity and trying the difference in taste between the two versions of lemon, even though it's the same lemon, is absolutely incredible. So I think what we do here is we're actually just inviting light into and love into this lemon that was always whole,
Mhm.
that we have learned something different. It's a different story about it. And I think that's so true for us, for me. And yeah, I am whole. And guess what, Tanya? You're whole. And we've always been this
I
way.
know.
And how many times we would be talking to each other and be like, I'm so broken. No, no, we're not. We've never been broken. It feels like that sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, and the shame that's associated with that. So shame is one of those sneaky buggers, right? Like
Oh,
all of a sudden it's like, oh, so now I'm feeling shame because I haven't known that until 50,
right.
right? Like,
First thing that levels up. Yep.
why shouldn't I just feel shame about that? Because I should have known sooner. And it's such a, well, in my experience, human condition of going back to somehow trying to force blame on what something I've done or not done, understood or not understood, reacted or not reacted to, right? So even in those moments where I'm triggered and I'm hooked in, and I don't necessarily know that I am until I realize it, right? Okay, so I'm going down the road of reaction now. And so I'm in full force reaction and I'm pounding against whatever it is that I'm reacting to, usually my boyfriend. Uh, and well,
The
and
people closest to us.
we're meant to stir, that stuff is meant to be stirred up, right? So when I can take a look at it from, you're not doing this to me, this event is happening, and now I can stand back and witness it. And what am
Mm,
I witnessing? And how can I bring forth this place of the vulnerability piece, like what I actually want to say, as opposed to what the hurt part of me wants to say, right? And just sort of surfacing that place gently and kindly, doing
yeah.
a bigger deep dive into what it is that's actually going on. And when we can be vulnerable like that, my experience has been that it is met with compassion.
Mm,
It's met in a way that isn't this trigger, 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 trigger explosion, that has normally happened and has happened many times in my life. Then the cycle of guilt and shame, right? So now, oh, I should have known better. I should have known better. Why didn't I do better? And the promise always to do it, better next time.
next time. Yeah.
It reminds me of the being really drunk and thinking, oh God, if you just please just spare me the hangover.
Yeah, I'll never drink again.
Never again until the following Friday. Thankfully, that hasn't been an issue certainly in my life, but I remember having those moments of which was also riddled with shame, right? Like, why did I do this to myself, or why did I put myself in that position where I'm drinking and a lot of people are having fun, but internally the message is, I'm not actually having a good time. I don't want to be doing this. Why am I surrounding myself with people that continue to walk the path that I see is no longer viable to me, and
Mm,
feeling shame and guilt around not wanting to stay with them, or feeling like I'm going to abandon whatever. Meanwhile, I'm abandoning myself
hmm.
and what I actually feel, and the intuition that's trying so hard to guide me. And I'm sure from time to time is looking like this. I say that in jest, but like it really is the insidiousness of shame, right? So even though
Yeah.
in that moment I may be nurturing myself, somehow this shame seeps in, and it's all of a sudden I've done something wrong, or I've done something bad, and I need to pay penance, or whatever the pieces are, and that I am learning to just engulf myself in so much self compassion and self love, and really identifying my value and the contributions that I make in all of the places that I make them. And that my value was never someone else's decision,
No.
but it was my understanding of it,
Yeah.
right? And so at the time, I treated myself as less than, and I felt like a second rate citizen, and I treated myself as such, and I lived my life as such
Yeah.
because I believed there was something wrong with me, and until I could, atone for all of these things that I did wrong, and usually something that I was victimized in, right?
Hmm.
Like that's the insidious part. right? That we convince ourselves that somehow it's our fault and that we deserved to be treated as such. And until we earn the right,
Or something. Yeah, yeah, I get
earn
that.
earn earn our
Yeah,
worth,
yeah,
and adapt, and it was always a destination for me. Like I kept thinking, when I get there, I don't know what
yeah.
there was, but it was
It was
always
always not here though. It was always not here. It's like,
true.
uh,
Yeah, true. It's not here, so it must be somewhere else, and I better race to it. Like this,
yeah,
this sense of I need to hurry. It needs to be quick. And what I've learned is through that's my trauma response. When I was a target, and I got hurt physically, mentally, sexually. So if I was always moving and I was going fast, then no one could catch me. And I
yeah,
was always moving, then I'm a moving target, and I'm less likely to be in a situation where I would be victimized again, which also wasn't true, but it was the illusion of that, right?
yeah,
And so I remember living life in the fast lane, literally,
yeah,
like driving fast, going everywhere fast, needing to feed my kids, McDonald's, because I wasn't really going anywhere. But it was
yeah,
that need and that incessant feeling that felt like if I stop, someone will get me and I might die. We're in danger. And so it was, and all of that stuff has been informed by all of our experiences in life, for sure.
yeah, yeah. Well, and and how wonderful it is now for both of us. I know that we travel a very similar journey in self healing and self rediscovery, and to be able to look back at these stories of our past, and to hold that little version of ourselves with love, and to let them know that it's okay to just be that love and that space that we always needed, that we didn't know how to honor ourselves at the time, and at any time to go back and just to hold ourselves in that space of love.
Well, and I wonder where that was born from, right? Like at some point in time, I was convinced that I needed someone else outside of
Yeah,
myself to answer for my worth. And
yeah,
if I couldn't earn that from you, then I couldn't feel those feelings myself. And so this, this trip around the sun, the 50th year, has been a really trajectory changing, and so many years have been. But this one in particular, when I'm looking at it from the place of really inviting in a level of vulnerability and self compassion, where I don't then have to go, I can see my worth only through your eyes.
yeah,
I can see my worth
yeah,
through my eyes for the first time, and I tell you, man, it's delightful, and yet it's shame still comes in, right? So like say I'm staring at myself in the mirror and I'm saying nice things to myself, all of a sudden that voice of doubt comes in and go, why are don't spend too much time looking at yourself. That would be vain.
mm, mm,
Like that's how insidious it is. And it's cloaked in so many different forms that sometimes we don't know that it actually is the overarching umbrella of shame or guilt, right? And
true.
convinced ourselves that we need to be seen through other people's version of us in order for us to feel worth.
I remember as a teenager, I got my own house phone. For my 16th birthday, my mom and dad got me my own house line because they were tired of me always being on their phone. And
I remember.
so something would happen in my life, and I would literally call Tanya. I would call two other friends to talk about a situation because I seemed unable to discern and to make decisions around whatever that was, and I needed the input from all of these people that I considered my pals to help me in making some of those decisions. And I'm not certain that at any point I ever took anybody else's input and actually walked with that, but I never was confident in my own abilities to make those decisions and to look within and to trust myself. And over the last, well, really, this last year has been the most powerful for me. So stepping into that and away from for years, I remember how many times I'd be like, this is when I would normally call my cousin Michelle, or this is when I would normally call Tanya, and I'm like, there's no value. I mean, there's value in sharing with my friends and my family, but really, this is an answer that is really from me. And so now I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Tanya, can I bounce this off of you? I just want to make sure that I'm seeing things right. And I actually had a situation just a couple weeks ago where I called Tanya and I said, "Hey, I'm in a really difficult position here, and I have some emotion that's attached to this, and I want to make sure that the story isn't being clogged by my own shit. Can you just help me see the forest through the trees and make sure that I'm on check?" I think that's a really different approach than, "I don't know what to do here. Can you tell me what to do?"
Yeah.
And so Tanya was reminded me that, hey, you are powerful and you are brilliant. She reminded me of all those things that I was maybe not telling myself. And so thank you for that. And that whole process actually does it takes away the option of shame and guilt in that decision that I was making, because I was pretty clear, bounced it off somebody who knows me really well, and I'm like, yep, nope, this is great. So guilt free, shame free, it was perfect.
I'm thinking back to situations, leading my kids through sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And some of the intuitive senses that I had that are very opposite what the norm or society, seems to deem as what should happen. And there was a lot of scrutiny, right? There was a lot of
Mhm.
scrutiny. And I was ostracized. There was a lot of judgment. It was heavy and hard, but there was something about it that I just internally knew. It was like, you know what, you are allowed to hold that opinion. You can. I'm not asking anyone else to change how they feel or what they're doing or anything else. I just know that this is what feels right for me, and this is what feels the most honoring for actually changing historically how this has come about, right? And so if I want to break the chains of abuse in my family history, in the lineage, generations back, as far back as I can see when I studied them in school. But I mean, at the time, I didn't know that. There was no handbook, and I certainly didn't go looking for it. And nobody said, "Hey, here's the 8 things you need to do, in order to make this right," so to speak. But I just had a sense and a feeling. So even though it was against the grain, even though there were people saying you're wrong, like dead out, you're wrong, and or if you don't do it this way, I'll just disown you and I won't be in your life anymore. So there was a lot of loss,
Yeah.
there was a lot of scrutiny, and it was really hard, and it was very dark, so it was hard to see light at that point in time. I couldn't really um discernibly understand that there's this one way to go, and the light will lead me there, right? It was like in the tiny moments there was these little flares of light, and it was like intuitively sensing that if I do these things, it is the best way to honor and be compassionate to what actually took place, and how to um, hold space for 4 different people, right? Me and 3 kids, plus anybody else that was having that experience. But in the immediate experience was 4 people with 4 very different versions of what happened,
Yeah.
and all of them true, and none of them competing, right?
Yeah.
And so it was hard. It was easier for me to hold space for my kids, knowing that I was being in service to them. But it was like I was an afterthought, mostly because I didn't know how to put myself first. I didn't know that, by giving from that place, it actually was draining.
Yeah.
And I didn't know those things. And now that I, sort of quote unquote know better, I can do those things that feel a lot more self honoring and feel compassionate to self. But again, similar to what you were saying, it's like this year that, I turned 50 in August. You've been 50 for half a year now. It is really come to light.
Mm.
There's this piece of I get to be there for myself. And so when I'm holding myself and I'm nurturing myself, and I don't have to then go, hey Carol, can you tell me that I'm okay, or that I have worth today? It's like, no, I wake up every day knowing that. And when I
Yeah.
know that and I sit in it just expands
Yeah.
naturally. It's a natural cause and effect, right? So, so here I have arrived at this place that I was always rushing to, that I didn't know existed. So, and how slow it is, right? Because
Yeah.
it isn't fast, and
No.
that response, even though it was like barely breathing, that response was born out of trauma. And I thought that was the regular way that I was supposed to be doing things. As long as I was rushing and on the go and I had these things happening in my life, that there was somehow meant that I was worthy. And what I came to understand was I needed to clear my plate and say, none of it, thank you.
Yeah.
And then decide from a really inquisitive, curious place. Okay, so what is something?
Mhm.
Not because, there's a buffet and I'm going to pick all these things because I should, because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's more of a, how do I actually feel? And is it okay to say no? Because I think
Mm.
quite often so many of us don't say no in so many situations because we feel guilty or shameful or like
What
offended.
some kind of fear, like worried about how somebody else is going to feel, like their feelings are more important than mine. Like how hello, I spent most of my life. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. Incredible. Well, you know what? As always, we have amazing conversations. I'm glad that we get to do this together. This is E
Yeah.
Squared with Carol Fisher and Tanya Horn. And off the cuff, we're just going to press record and see what comes. So thanks for being with us around shame today. I'm sure it is a
Yeah.
subject that we will talk way more about. Leave
Absolutely.
comments in the comment box and
And
subscribe.
subscribe.